Hello, my name is Simon Rogers with TIA, the Telecommunications Industry Association. Thanks for joining our discussion on the FCC's vote yesterday on a hotly debated item, the Restoring Internet Freedom Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, which addresses the future of net neutrality rules. The proposal, which rolls back Title II reclassification of broadband, not only impacts ISPs, but the supply chain TIA represents, the companies that build these networks, from Silicon Valley innovators to Midwestern manufacturers. Today we have with us Jeff Campbell from Cisco, Jared Carlson from Ericsson, and Kathleen Abernathy, former FCC Commissioner and former Senior Executive at Frontier Communications. They're here today to discuss their perspectives on the adoption of this NPRM and whether legislation offers a better path forward. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
This first question is for Jeff and Jared. Since the 2015 Open Internet Order was adopted, what impact have you seen in the market, and how have consumers reacted?
I think what we've seen in the telecommunications market and the internet infrastructure market is a significant pause in investments and decisions that are being made by companies competing in this market in order for them to assess the impact of the significant amount of regulation that's being imposed upon this. Now, it doesn't mean that everything has stopped, but it does mean that people are looking longer and harder about what to do. And in particular, they're looking very hard about investing in new innovative areas for new services that might require things like quality of service or some sort of prioritization. And I think that's had a very significant impact on the market at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we've seen a real flat line, maybe not flatlining, but a real flattening of investment in the market. And I would second what Jeff has said, where what you imagine that's going on in operators' heads is a general fear of trying to push the envelope. And when you're talking about 5G in particular, that's exactly what we're talking about, is trying to take things to the next level and look at solutions that haven't been tried before.
Kathleen, as a commissioner during a time when this issue was debated at the FCC, was classifying broadband as a Title I information service as controversial and partisan as it is today?
So there wasn't a lot of controversy around where you put it, if you could even put it under the Act, because the Internet's not part of the telecommunications statute. It was last updated in 1995-96, and there's no place where the Internet is even mentioned. So the only regulatory landing pad, potentially, if you want to impose some obligations, was really this thing called Title I, which is an information service, which also is not a real thing anyway. So the idea that somehow we moved away from this bipartisan consensus that the Internet should thrive without regulation to a regulatory framework that says, let's burden it with all of the common carrier rules, regs, and hurdles that were designed for a monopoly provider makes no sense. And I think what happened is this just became sort of urban lore that we needed to regulate the Internet. And now we're stepping back and saying, all right, what do we do to continue to incent innovation, investment, and creativity?
So Jeff and Jared, back to you. Do you think that we should be legislating in this area? And if so, what would your priorities be?
I think it's a perfect opportunity for Congress to take up the situation to resolve these questions rather than having the FCC constantly bat things back and forth. But of course, it matters enormously what Congress chooses to do in that, in which case I think we really need to look at what has caused the Internet to thrive so far, which is very light touch regulation, only when necessary to protect consumers and competition, while also incenting innovation and allowing technology to develop, be deployed, and used by consumers before we maybe decide in advance that something like prioritization might be a good thing in certain situations and might not be good in other situations. But we want to have a world in which the technology is brought forward rather than inhibited by statute. If we go down that path, I think the legislation could be very helpful in the market.
Yes, I agree. I think that part of the uncertainty is that we've seen, as Kathleen just said, we've seen a consensus around Title I, which wasn't really a thing. But a consensus for light touch regulation, now we swung the other way under Chairman Pai, hopefully will swing back to the regime that we had before. But unfortunately, all of this uncertainty cries out for an answer, a legislative solution, something that not only promotes investment, but also promotes consumer protection. And I think that there actually is a path forward for a bipartisan approach here.
So given that this has become such a, again, hotly debated issue and so controversial at the FCC open meeting yesterday, I understand there were protesters outside. Do you have any ideas for how we could move forward and have Democrats and Republicans working together like they did during your tenure at the FCC?
I think that what people care most about is that the tremendous benefits of the internet be available to everyone. And there's a lack of understanding of some of the innovative new applications, prioritization, ways that it can be utilized to improve lives and livelihood. And so what becomes very important is regulatory humility. In other words, don't start designing a regulatory framework before you even know what the product or the technology is going to look like. And that's why I am very optimistic about what Chairman Pai is trying to do.
And on Capitol Hill, any ideas how we can bring Republicans and Democrats together?
Well, it's always a bit of a challenge, of course, but and that's the nature of the political system. But historically, we've had an enormous amount of bipartisan support and activity in the technology industry and in legislation in this space. So I see no reason why we can't do it here. I would urge the members of the Congress to focus on the technology, the future of the technology, and while protecting consumers, making sure that we can actually bring to market technology that will benefit people going forward, and not deciding that one way is always the correct way in every single situation. I think if you come at it with an open mind and you focus on it as a technology problem, we'll come to a very reasonable accommodation.
Yeah, I agree, and recognize that there's innovation in all parts of the network. It's not just at the edge. There's innovation in the work that Cisco and Ericsson and other members of TIA do in the networks themselves, and recognize that there's real value there, and that these networks are expensive, and providing opportunities and incentives for operators to actually build these networks benefits everybody.
Well, thank you so much. I think we'll end on that optimistic note. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Senator.